Hello and welcome to the M.B.Om podcast, where you'll learn to master the business of yoga. M.B.Om is a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith. I'm a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, a yoga business coach, and a total business geek. Here at M.B.Om, you'll learn everything you need to know to create a sustainable yoga business by learning from myself and guests from around the world about how they built their yoga businesses, and about how you too can become a successful yoga teacher, studio owner, and much more. All right, let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the M.B.Om podcast. I am excited to dive in with you for today's episode of the show. Before we get into talking about setting boundaries in our yoga businesses, I just want to give a quick little shout out to OfferingTree for sponsoring this episode of the show. OfferingTree is my top recommendation for yoga teachers. It is an amazing one-stop shop for all things yoga business and digital marketing. So make sure you go check them out, offeringtree.com/MBOM. And if you do want to sign up, you'll get a special little discount through that link. And I'll tell you a bit more about the software and why I love it a little bit later on in the episode. So stay tuned for that. And today on the podcast, like I said, we're going to be talking about boundaries. And boundaries is a topic that is really, really important for me. And that's because this has been extremely challenging for me in my business. And I'll share some examples of how I've set boundaries in my business when it's been challenging to do so. You know, the struggle of kind of standing up for myself and saying no, or no, I can't do that right now, or this is the earliest I can have it be done, and feeling like there's guilt and that my people-pleasing ways are hurting others' feelings, et cetera, et cetera. But before we get into that, I just want to start by actually defining boundary. And so we did this a number of weeks ago and we talked about values as well. And I think that it's just so important for everyone to be very clear and on the same page about what we're talking about when we're talking about boundary. And so I looked up the definition for boundary, and it's defined as a line that marks the limits of an area, a dividing line or a limit of a subject or sphere of activity. And so this definition is, I guess, a little bit vague and maybe hard to conceptualize for how this actually relates to our yoga business. But when I think about a boundary, I think about, okay, a boundary can be thought of as like maybe our property line, or, you know, the line or limit that we kind of set with something. And so metaphorically speaking, I feel like a boundary can be thought of kind of like a door or a fence. So when you go into a bedroom or maybe you go into the bathroom, you close the door, and the door is a physical boundary. Or when you move into a new house in a neighborhood that has houses around it, we have a fence that's in between us and our neighbors. And basically what these door and this fence does is it gives us space and privacy. So even if you love and adore your roommate or you love your neighbor, we still want to create this space and privacy for ourselves. And that's where these like boundaries become very important. And things like doors on bathrooms and fences between neighbors is something that's really common in our society. Your neighbor is probably not going to get upset when you put a fence up, even if you're best friends, because they understand this boundary. It's very common in our society. Yet setting boundaries in our business can be a really different story. Sometimes setting boundaries with people we work with, or with students, or with studio owners that we work with can be much more challenging, because they don't necessarily see it the same way as like, hey, I love living with you. Hey, I love living beside you, but I just need a little bit of space right now. And it's really important that we're setting these boundaries for our own sanity, for our own mental health, and just for our own peace of mind. Boundaries are super, super important. Now, this was the type of thing for me where I didn't necessarily feel like it was something that I needed to do when I first started out as a yoga teacher and as a podcast host and as a yoga business owner. I felt like, hey, I don't really need to set boundaries because What I need to do is just be really open to working with a lot of people. I want to work with as many clients as possible and as many students as possible. And I need to make more money. And so I don't really have the ability to set boundaries. And this was something that I told myself for many years until I was making much more money and had a lot more clients and was at a point where I was totally burned out because I was working 7 days a week and I had no, hours or structure, anything like that. And so the reason I tell you that is to kind of give you just a very brief, quick example of how even if you are brand new to teaching and teaching one class a week and making literally, maybe $200 off your yoga teaching a month, it's still okay to set boundaries in your business. And in fact, it's something that I would really encourage you to do earlier on, because I think it's a lot easier to do this earlier on than it is to do once you're already working with people and once you've already set expectations. It's a lot easier to clearly set expectations like right off the get-go than it is to set expectations once you've been working with somebody for a year or 2 years. Here's an example. Say you work for a studio owner, and when you are a little bit greener, a little bit newer to teaching, you are super excited about teaching all classes. And yes, heck yes, this is something that I love to hear. This is something that I really encourage, say yes as much as you can. And at some point you might feel like, okay, teaching this 6 a.m. class on a Sunday morning isn't worth it for me because I don't have any time to myself, or I don't have any time with my kids, or I don't have any time with my partner. And so you need to start saying no to that. And if you've been teaching it for a year, it's going to be a lot harder to have that conversation. However, it's okay for you to set a boundary a little bit later on like that. Like, hey, this was really something that I loved doing in the beginning. I loved getting the experience, but now I'm teaching so much more and I just am not able to do that. But if you are going into something where you're also aware, like, hey, this is the only day I have with my kids or with my partner, it's also okay to say no right off the get-go and say, Sundays are not a day that I'm able to help out with this, or Sundays are not a day I'm able to take on classes. It's okay to just say that straight up right off the get-go, even though it can be really hard. And so before I get too caught up in just talking about a bunch of examples around boundaries, I want to get a bit more specific about what can be a boundary in your business, because we kind of defined what a boundary is and talked about it a little bit more metaphorically and talked about, the challenges around boundaries, but what actually is a boundary in your yoga business? And so a few things that I think of as boundaries, and particularly important boundaries in your business, are setting work days. So days where you work, days where you don't work is a really important boundary. Setting work hours can be a really important boundary. So like that example, maybe it's I don't work on Sundays, or I don't work on Sundays past noon, or, I work Monday to Thursday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., or from noon till 8 p.m., depending on your teaching schedule. You can set work hours that really work for you. Another boundary that you want to give yourself in your business is giving yourself time away from work where you don't answer messages from students or check emails. And this one is a really hard one with how connected we are these days, because it's so easy on your day off that you've given yourself to pop onto your phone and just pull your email app up and check some emails quickly, or answer some text messages from students that have come in, late on a Saturday or whatever it is. And it's really important that we have these clear times set where we don't do this type of stuff and that we honor it for ourselves. And similar to this can also be giving yourself time away in terms of like vacations or long weekends, or taking more extended time away from the work that you're doing. And so that might be an even harder boundary for you to set, where you're like, hey, I'm going totally offline for 1 week and I'm not checking anything. And I say this from experience. Last Christmas, so December 2020, I decided that I wasn't going to be working around Christmas and New Year's. And so I did a ton of work in December to batch and automate and set up systems and set my team up for success so that we were all able to just take this time off. And then I actually took the time and I was, so tempted to just check social media and so tempted to check emails and so tempted to do work because I had the time and space because I created it. And yet what I recognized when I actually took the time away from my work is all of a sudden I had new ideas and I had new inspiration. And I was also, I was so excited at the start of 2021 to jump back into my business. And I know that this is a feeling that I haven't felt other years when I've kind of just propelled through and only taken, a couple days off work. And for me, this works really well because I don't have a lot of people signing up for coaching calls. I don't teach teacher trainings. A lot of people aren't really listening to podcast episodes because they're on vacation too. And so this is a good time for me in my business to take time off. And it's so important for you to identify these seasons of the year when you can take some time away from your work, or just identifying time within your week, every week where you can take time away from work, where you're not checking your phone, you're not checking your computer, you're not checking your iPad, you're not checking your emails. We're just giving ourselves time and space. And so that is a boundary. And one last boundary that I want to mention, which this list is certainly not exhaustive. There's tons and tons of ways that we can set boundaries. But another one that I'll just mention that I think is so important for us as yoga teachers and yoga entrepreneurs is setting minimum prices that will work for us and then honoring that. And this is really important because it's so easy when we want to serve our community to just be like, yeah, I'll say yes to this, even though it's not paying me very well and it's not really worth my time and I'm not that excited about it. No, we need to have minimums that we need to have met. And perhaps we break this boundary for special community events or ways that we want to give back or charity work, et cetera, et cetera. You can decide that for yourself. But in general, I feel like we can't be compromising constantly on what our minimum is, because we only have so much time in the day and we have to be selective about how we use our time. So I feel like that's another really great way that we can set boundaries in our business. And a way in which I've done this is with coaching. So obviously I have prices on my website, and then I have opportunities for people to meet with me one-on-one if they want to, work with me over a long period of time. And one thing I always chat with them about is what their budget is and where they're at in their business. And for me, I have, my ideal pricing structure for certain programs and offerings and packages, but I also have a minimum that I'm willing to go down to if somebody has, for example, been hit really hard by the pandemic and hasn't been working, or is just starting out for the first time and they haven't made a cent off their yoga business yet they want to start coaching and they want to start creating a business. And so it's okay for you to do this too, where you kind of set this minimum. And if somebody can't work within that, that's okay. That might not be like the best fit for you, but it's nice to have this as a boundary. So we are going to dive into all of these things that I mentioned in a little bit more detail. But before we do that, let's just take a quick break to hear from our sponsor, OfferingTree. Hey, yoga teachers. We're just taking a quick break from the podcast episode to talk about OfferingTree and online courses. When it comes to courses, there are so many different ways that you can go about creating them. You could create a step-by-step video course that teaches students about a specific skill or specialization. You could sell or rent on-demand videos, repurposing your online classes. Or you could decide to bundle your courses or classes with a membership instead of selling them as standalone items. Every yoga business is different, but if you want to start offering on-demand video content, I recommend using OfferingTree. First of all, you'll have complete control of who gets your content, including who can see it and who can download it. You get unlimited video uploads, and you can offer content as a part of a membership, charge one-time fees, or use sliding scale pricing. Drip content out over time, offer limited access rentals, sell recordings, and so much more. The possibilities really are endless, and that's just one reason why I love OfferingTree. But don't just take it from me. There are so many users of OfferingTree that really, really love the software as much as I do. Chrisanne, a yoga teacher based in Colorado and the owner of Love Sauce Yoga, shared, "I just want to say thank you so much for this amazing website builder. Not only has it uplifted my confidence as an online yoga teacher, but it's helped me to find my niche in the yoga teaching world and connect with students." So if you're looking to get started with a website for your yoga business, or you're looking for an online tool that's easier and cheaper than what you're using now, definitely check out OfferingTree. And because you listen to M.B.Om, you'll get a special discount. Just head over to offeringtree.com/M.B.Om for 15% off an annual plan or 50% off 3 months. And don't forget that everyone gets a 14-day free trial. Once again, that's offeringtree.com/M.B.Om. All right, now back to the show. All right, friends, we are back and we're continuing our conversation around boundaries. And I hope that so far this conversation is feeling good to you and feeling like something that you kind of needed to have in your business. Again, like I said in the beginning, and I've given examples already, this is hard work, and this has been hard work for me in my business. And so I just want to honor you for starting to do this work. So the first thing I want to talk about when it comes to setting work days is how to actually set up a schedule with days off when you don't work a Monday to Friday job. And this can be quite challenging. And so one thing that I would suggest would be to start by sitting down with your calendar and having some sort of a visual that you can look at. So maybe a printout of your a month or a week, or having a paper day timer if you have one, something that can be really visual, or maybe just pulling your calendar up on Google Calendars or whatever you use, and plugging in all of the things that you need to do so you can get a really clear visual on when you're teaching and when you're not teaching. And one thing that I found really challenging when I first started doing this was that I had a lot of different clients and students and things that I was doing on pretty much every day of the week. And so I was consistently like, well, I can't take like a full day off because I have X on Saturday morning and I have, this other thing to do Saturday afternoon. And then, Sunday evening, I have this other thing. So I was kind of like, okay, well, I can take from like Saturday when one thing ends until Sunday evening. And that's kind of, basically like my quote unquote day off. And that sort of worked for me for a little bit, but it ended up just burning me out in the long term, to be quite honest, because I didn't have, any days off. And for me, I found it quite challenging to be taking weekdays off. So what I would really recommend for you is to have something visual where you can look at your schedule, you can see where your breaks are, you can see where you're busiest, and you'll have a sense for what days are busy and what are not. And I would really try to make sure that you've got one day where you can be totally offline, where you don't teach any classes, you don't teach any privates, you don't run workshops, you don't do anything in your business. And just have that be a you day or a family day or whatever you want it to be, an adventure day. And make sure that you're really, creating that space. And then if you can, having 2 days off back to back can be really, really amazing. And this is something that Renee Claire from the Productive Wellnesspreneur really helped me with probably about a year and a half ago at the end of 2020. I was just feeling like only having Sundays off, which is what I had at that point, was just not working for me. And I really needed 2 back-to-back days off. And it just required having 2 conversations with 2 clients that I worked with where I had small obligations on Saturdays. And I basically just asked, can we move these to a weekday? I'm getting super burnt out. I'm not able to have the types of adventures I want, the travels I want. And both of them were really open for it. And so I was able to create a full weekend for myself. And so it starts with looking at your schedule. It starts with identifying where you already have the time and space, and then looking at, hey, how can I make more time and space? And then having those potentially hard conversations with somebody. So just knowing that even if these conversations feel like they might be challenging or like you might be letting somebody down, they're totally worth it. And we need to do this for ourselves. It's so important. And for me, I really found that the people pleaser in me was going off like crazy. It didn't want me to have this conversation. It didn't want me to, let my clients down, but they were totally understanding of what I needed to show up my best and be my best self and to work with them at a high level of energy and give them a good quality. And honestly, once I switched my schedule, I recognized how resentful I'd been towards these clients because I wasn't setting these boundaries. And that's all on me. It was all on me to have that conversation.
All right, yoga teachers, I have something fun in store for you. I am super excited to introduce you guys to Magic Mind, the little magical elixir which makes your body hum. They're also sponsoring this episode. Magic Mind is the world's first productivity drink that not only gives you the alertness that coffee and other energy drinks do, but also has ingredients to support memory, increase creativity, and boost focus. Magic Mind's goal is to help you do more and stress less, which is exactly what I need as a new mom and a busy entrepreneur. I really love Magic Mind because it helps me with my procrastination and brain fog, but doesn't give me the jitters and crashes the way that coffee does. For me, I love to enjoy my Magic Mind first thing in the morning. I heat it up with some frothed milk and make a little matcha latte, which is the perfect way to start my day. So if you are looking to have more energy, more productivity with something that gives you all natural ingredients, Magic Mind gave me a 20% off code to share with you. It is yoga. So go to magicmind.co/yoga and use the code yoga to get 20% off your first order. Once again, that's magicmind.co/yoga and use the code yoga to get 20% off your first order. All right, now back to the episode.
So similarly, the next thing is around work hours. And the big question here is, how do we set work hours when we're not a physical brick and mortar business? And how do we set hours when we don't work a traditional 9 to 5? So if you don't have your schedule, your teaching schedule down to being in like the Monday to Friday 9 to 5 work hours, you're not abnormal. A lot of classes that are really popular are on nights and weekends, and that can make it really hard for us to set hours in our yoga businesses. And so again, I would take that calendar that you already have or whatever your visual is for setting up your days, and I would make sure your classes are clearly written in so you can see your hours and you can see what hours you're currently working and what you're currently, working on in that time. And even more so than just having your yoga classes or your privates, your time where you're actually with your students, when are you actually working on your business? Because as yoga teachers, we do so much more than just teach yoga. You're certainly not just teaching from 12 to 1 and that's all you're doing in the day. If you're working in the mornings and in the afternoons around your classes, make sure that goes in your calendar so you can really clearly see when you're working. So you can really clearly see, okay, hey, on my average Tuesday, I'm getting up and I'm starting work at 9. I'm teaching, from 12 to 1. I'm working again till 5, and then I'm teaching again. So your work day is like 9 till 6 in that example. So, are your work hours 9 to 6 on that day, or do you need to start a little bit later that day to have a little bit more clear boundaries? And so this is really for you. And this is also for you to be able to know when you're going to say yes and no to things like privates, to things like new classes, et cetera, et cetera. And so basically you just have to look at your calendar and see, what your work hours are. And sometimes our schedules can get a little complicated, and sometimes we work in the mornings and then we work in the evenings, but maybe our closed hours are in the afternoons. And that's the time where we go out and we go hiking, or we hang out with a friend, or we, do our own practice, or we just do something for ourselves. So you really get to be the boss of this, and you have to make sure that it works for you and it's something that you'll stick to. And so the next boundary we talked about was giving yourself time away from work, not answering messages and emails. And something that I find really, really helpful can be having an autoresponder that you just set up on your email that sends out an automatic email that gives clear expectations to people about when you get back to them. I find for me that I feel a lot of pressure to respond to emails as soon as I see them. And so if I'm doing things like checking my emails on a Sunday morning when I'm not supposed to be working, and I see something that has an action item, I'm instantly tempted to work on it. And so for me, being able to have something like an autoresponder that says like, hey, I work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and I'll respond within 48 hours of your email just kind of takes that pressure away from me because I've set this boundary with my client, but I've also communicated that boundary with my client and I've clearly given them expectations. So they know, hey, I don't work on this day. And then it'll probably take me, 2 business days to get back to you once I am at my computer. So they can go in their head, okay, I probably will hear back from her on Wednesday. And to me, that feels so much better than it just sitting there and them wondering like when they're going to hear from me, et cetera, et cetera. So some people struggle with this, some people don't. And it's just something to know about yourself. But I actually feel like if you're somebody who struggles to get on your email and to respond to emails in a timely fashion because you don't like doing it and you procrastinate it, so totally different reason than me, but still equally valid, this is also a great place for an email autoresponder because you can set expectations like, hey, I'll respond to you within 7 business days. That gives you a lot of time to get on your email. If say you only have a couple hours of admin scheduled into your weekly schedule. So again, this can be a really great boundary to set for yourself. And then a couple other things that I want to talk about and share that are so important with boundaries are, one, knowing your limits and when it's time to say no to something. And I think that this just comes with time and practice. I think that this comes from saying yes to something and realizing that it wasn't worth it, or it didn't serve you, or it wasn't in line with your business. And then knowing that you need to say no next time. I think that knowing our limits and then honoring them is really important. So once you start teaching and you're teaching regularly, you'll know how many classes you can teach in a day, in a week before it just becomes too much. And we really, really, really need to be sticking to these limits and saying no when it's not going to serve us. And this is really important because we can get burnt out quite easily when we're saying yes to things that, one, don't serve our business, and 2, are just beyond what we have capacity for. And this is something that I have really learned from experience. There have been so many moments in my years of entrepreneurship where I've said yes to something because I thought it would be, the good thing to do or a good experience. And then I just show up and I just can't show up 100% because, I've taught too much already, or I've done too many podcast interviews that day or that week. And so for me, just knowing my limits and when it's time to say no or no for now is really important. And then the second thing I wanted to share is honoring yourself, your practice, and your self-care. And I think that it's really important when it comes to these 3 things that we are making sure that we have some sort of non-negotiables in our life. And so for me, I have non-negotiables in my morning routine. So I don't set up calls before 10 a.m. That's one of my non-negotiables. Occasionally, I will make a exception for this because of somebody else's schedule or time zone or something like that. For example, I have a podcast interview before 10 a.m. next week because the person I'm interviewing is in Thailand and it's just really, really hard with the schedules. We either have to do kind of earlier mornings or later evenings, and they're also negotiating by, being up pretty late to do it. And so there are times where you can kind of go against your non-negotiables, but in general, one of my non-negotiables is, like I said, no calls before 10. And that really gives me the time and space in my mornings to set up my day. And so a couple of my other non-negotiables and self-care things that I do are my morning routines. So getting up and doing a meditation, drinking a lemon water, doing some form of intuitive movement and practice, and just making sure I'm connecting to my body and mind before I'm checking my emails, before I'm getting started with my day. And I've just found that over the years, I've been wishy-washy with this. I've had times in my life and my business where this has not been a quote unquote non-negotiable, or I've been really flexy with my non-negotiable and kind of let people come in. And then I'm always, like I mentioned before, resentful. I feel resentful towards that person. And that's not fair to them because it's me who said yes to it. So it's a reminder that if we have things that are important to us, like some sort of a meditation or daily practice, that we are really honoring that for ourselves. And I completely understand that sometimes it's hard, especially with balancing finances and family commitments, because we want to say yes to things. And sometimes we feel like we need to say yes to things because of finances. But I think at the end of the day, we're looking to create sustainable yoga businesses, which means that these are yoga businesses that will serve us in the long run. And, living kind of day to day, and the mentality of like, I'll just say yes this one time, or I'll just do this one time, or, this is really worth it for me right now because I really need the extra money. How many times do you say that before you feel totally burnt out and you're injured or you're sick or you're not able to teach anymore? And so, of course, this is completely up to you how you want to handle this. You know your situation best, you know yourself best. And so you can know when it's important to really hold firm on a boundary and when it's okay to be a bit flexible with it. But I would really come back to, what we've talked about today with knowing your limits, knowing when it's time to say no, and then always making sure that you've got some sort of non-negotiable. So I shared a little bit of my non-negotiables in the morning with my call times and that type of thing. So I usually start work around 9 so that I have a bit of time before any calls or podcast interviews or anything like that on my schedule to check my email and do a bit of my admin stuff. And then I have pretty firm boundaries around shutdown times. I usually shut down around 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. And, I'll make exceptions as I choose to do so when it comes to doing calls in the evening. But in general, I don't work in the evenings. I don't answer clients in the evenings. I have a shutdown ritual in terms of looking at my tasks for the day, setting myself up for the next day, closing my inbox down, all that type of stuff so that I really feel like I can close my computer and step away for the evenings. And then I do another shutdown ritual on Friday afternoons, and I don't check my emails or messages from clients or do virtually any work on Saturdays and Sundays. And that has been such a gift that I've given myself. And, there's obviously times where maybe I've been away, or maybe I've got a really busy weekday week coming up and I am not going to be working as much. And maybe for me, it actually might feel less stressful to hop on Sunday night and just go through my emails and check those all and that type of thing. And if that's the case, then that's okay because I'm deciding to break that boundary. I don't feel resentful in that case. So hopefully you can see from this how we're able to set up boundaries, and then we're able to choose how we really uphold these boundaries and in what ways we can honor ourselves and our clients and our students and just make sure that everyone has the best experience possible. And I just want to leave you with one final thought, that sometimes people act like creating boundaries are selfish, and I completely disagree with this. I think that creating boundaries are necessary in our business, and I think that they're super important for, like I mentioned before, our sanity and our mental health. And I think just for creating that longevity in your business. Like I said before, burnout is not going to be sustainable. It's not something that lasts over the long term. And in order for us to create businesses that are truly sustainable in the long term, we have to set boundaries. We have to say no to things, and we have to honor if there's some people, some students, some classes that just aren't going to work in our life. So I hope that this has been helpful for you. I hope that you come away from this episode feeling empowered to start setting boundaries in your yoga business. Of course, if you have any questions, make sure you reach out. A huge thank you to OfferingTree for sponsoring this episode of the show. Make sure you go give them some love, offeringtree.com/M.B.Om. And thank you for listening to this episode. It's been a pleasure being here with you, and I will see you again next week. Bye for now.